Hello, everyone, and welcome. How's everyone doing today? It is almost 7:30 on the dot. It is May 22nd, and we're here with Alex. Week 3 of Start Your Engines. Alex, floor is
All right.
yours.
Welcome aboard, everybody. So, this is part three of the four-part series that we are doing, trying to get everybody a good framework for how to begin. This week, the focus is coming from sleep and recovery at the standpoint. But before that, why should you even listen to us? Well, I'm Alex. I work at APSC, AdaptableStrength.com. Been I was in 911 for about 4 years and everything, so I've got the first responder experience that's relevant to what we're going to be talking about. But beyond that, I've been lifting myself for 23 years. I've got a BS in biology. I'm a personal trainer, nutrition coach. I used to compete in powerlifting. Now I'm a coach for bodybuilding, powerlifting, general health improvement, all of that. And I do that with the general focus of keeping everything practical, relatable, and something that's going to be able to be acted upon and not just try to spit out fancy words that seem scary and then scare you into listening. I want you to actually understand what I'm saying, not be scared of what I'm saying.
And I'm Joe Fisher, Director of Operations at 98 Octane, on a mission to help 1 million military first responders reclaim their health and wellness. I was in the military 9 years in the Army, Patriot missiles. I was 40 pounds heavier, and I have two wiener dogs that you can hear in the background. And that's me.
The dogs are the best touch ever. All right, so sleep, recovery, rest. Those are the main focuses of today. Now, whenever there is something that is going to be universally true for military and first responders, that is sleep is going to be something that is either compromised, pushed away, or may not even happen. I can guarantee you that there is a certain understanding that if something is going to happen, something pops off, there is a good chance that you are going to be responding to it, or you have stories or times where you have been having to respond to something along those lines. And it could be as simple as a storm or as extreme as an attack and everything in between. There's so many times that your scheduling is also going to cause you to end up in a situation where you can have no schedule. The most extreme example I can give you for me and the work that I was doing was that I had for way longer than I would have liked the schedule of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. for 2 day shifts to then be off for 24 hours, to then go in at 7 p.m. to get off at 7 a.m. for 2 night shifts, to then be off for 96 hours and then have to go back in at 7 a.m. again to repeat that. And it was this 8 day rotation that was designed to be the absolute worst it can possibly be for your health.
Yep.
But even if you don't have a set schedule on those lines, how many times have you been around someone and you're like, dude, are you okay over there? And they're like, oh, yeah, I didn't get much sleep last night. I was okay. Well, are you going to be able to get that in? Like, are you going to get early nights? And he's like, oh, no, I'll just sleep over the weekend. Or even worse, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Just no.
Yeah.
There are like there's so much that is bad about that, and we'll get into that. But Joe, I mean, I know you've had some crazy schedules too.
Yeah. I mean, from the 24 on, 24 off, they just lie when they say 24 off. It's not 24 hours off um, when you're on deployments. But yeah, I slept a lot in the desert and in makeshift bathrooms, and tried to get my sleep where I could. I guess I fell asleep standing up for the first time in my whole life. My first day in the Army, I was in MEPS waiting for my picture to be taken, and that picture, I looked like I shouldn't be anywhere near anything, any human being on Earth. I looked real rough, real bad. But yeah, I mean, it's the most talked about, least cared about thing in the military. Everyone talks about getting sleep. Everyone tries to change regulations and say, "Oh, sleep is important, and we want to keep the fighting force strong." But the reality is, the people who work hard are going to work hard, and the people who aren't are going to be sleeping in the back. So we're trying to teach you how to optimize that time that you do have and get naps in where you can. But yeah, good luck getting it full 8 hours of sleep working in the jobs that we're talking about. But this is about learning the skills.
Yes. So naps are a whole can of worms when it comes to try and talk about optimizing sleep. So, before we can get into that big discussion, first you have to understand what sleep is actually for and what your body does with sleep. And what it all goes down to is that your body functions on a natural 24-hour, give or take, rhythm. It's called your circadian rhythm. And it's supposed to govern not just when you are awake or when you are asleep, but it does more than that. It aligns with that aspect certain body processes. And if you want to have the best way to just to instantly relate to that, when you are awake, you can take a dump at any point. However, you don't ever wake up in the middle of the night to defecate.
Hopefully not.
That's yeah, ideally speaking. I will say there are caveats with these statements, that you don't have an underlying health condition that makes these wrong. But for the majority of the populations out there, you may wake up in the middle of the night to pee, but not to take a dump. And you can tell this just in everyday vernacular when people talk about their morning dump. What's actually happening is that your body has turned off certain aspects of functioning to some degree while you are asleep, and they will be turned back on again to a certain degree when you are awake. And that is just the instant relatable aspect where it's like, oh, I wake up, I have my morning coffee, and then I take my dump. And that's like their regular thing. Or even if someone doesn't drink coffee, there's always like they wake up and as they're moving around, okay, then they have their morning dump. Like it sounds crude, but everybody poops. There are books about that and everything. So it's just a relatable way to understand the example that it's one of the processes that happens when you're awake, but not as much when you are asleep. So, how do you recognize that alongside disrupted sleep? That is a whole different ballgame. Your body wants to wake up and go to bed at the same time every single day. And having things that affect that will turn your body into just a whole town of confusion. And it'll go as simple as just having you notice that for some reason, even when you're on night shifts, you don't poo as much versus the day shifts. And it can go also to the point of affecting your body's ability to produce hormones,
Yeah.
as well as things that are necessary for your general functionality. Again, relatable, easily understood example of that is testosterone. You actually require a functioning circadian rhythm, again, to a certain degree, to actually be able to produce the amount of testosterone that you are supposed to. And it's supposed to be a cycle of how of your levels of testosterone and cortisol functioning throughout the day. And then when you are asleep, it then does its other fluctuations as well and maybe gets produced more, or however it's going to happen. But essentially, you can simplify the whole thing down to if you do not have a circadian rhythm and you are up at all different hours of the day and the night and your body can never get into a rhythm, you are going to have health detriments to the point of maybe something as simple as your testosterone lowers more so than otherwise would have, but all the way up to that actually being a carcinogen.
Yep.
The World Health Organization has classified shift work itself just as a broad category as a carcinogen. And I don't know if you guys recognize that, but cancer is bad and avoidable cancer is worse. So it gives a really bad figuring if you're trying to figure out how to actually balance that out.
In the same class of shift work is the processed meat we spoke about before and the cigarettes. So if you're on night shift eating hoagies, smoking cigarettes, you're probably going to get cancer. That's just that's how it works. So I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but that's how it is.
Yeah, like I agree with that again up to a point. It's I think a more factual way to state that is that it increases your odds of what would otherwise have been preventable. And for me personally, I saw that all the time in 911 because 911 in some ways is worse than other shift works because 911 you are sedentary. You're at a desk. You can't walk around. You are tethered with a headset to your station. You can't decide to get up and every hour on the hour walk around for 10 minutes, and since you've got a radio attached to yourself you're still in contact and still active. No, like the 911 you are attached to your desk, so if you have a 12-hour shift and you get 1 hour of breaks, theoretically you could take a couple minutes every hour, but then you only have a couple minutes every hour and that's it, but you still have that limit to an hour. But let's say you are in EMS, if you're in fire or police and you have the night shift, at the very least you can get up, move around, be active, and actually engage your body a bit more, and it might help to a certain degree. But no matter what, you are having health detriments by just being awake at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the reality of the job, unfortunately. So we get into a discussion about, okay, if I'm trying to organize my sleep and I know that I have to do full day shifts and then full night shifts, and I'm trying to keep everything as similar as possible in order to maximize the health that I can, well then how is that done? So I'll tell you what I did personally. What I did was I actually mapped out the waking hours, and I took my 7 a.m. starts, my 7 p.m. starts, and what I tried to do was to then make it so that when I was awake on night shifts, I try to keep my wake up and sleep times as constant as I can throughout the rest of the week. So what it looked like was this: I would wake up at I think I like 5:30 a.m., get ready for my shift and everything, and then go. And I would always go in early. Then get out, come back in the next day, sleeping normally, and then between my second day shift and first night shift, I stayed up for 24 hours. And then what I did was sleep from about 4 a.m. until noon, work out, then do my night shifts. And then once the night shifts were done, I came home, chilled for a couple hours because my brain's fried from having 48 hours of 911 in such a short amount of time. And once I cooled down, I take a nap for 3 hours and I wake up before noon. And then I make my bedtime 10 o'clock for all of the nights that I can to keep it as constant as I could. Far from perfect, and it kind of worked. And I made sure to do things that would keep me engaged when I had to be awake and active. So I made it health focused by having that last night shift, get off at 7 a.m., chill for a little bit, sleep for a few hours. What I then did for the next 4 hours was I stepped outside and I grilled food for my meal prep. So I took my least functional hours when all I want to do is sleep or die, and I made healthy food. And then I would come back in and chill a little bit, maybe read a book or whatever that's nice and relaxed, and then go to bed early. And then I have no excuse to not continue to be healthy throughout the rest of my week. So you can find ways to take it to your advantage.
Yeah, I think it's also important. I mean, in when I was in the military, I always used to get my time back, right? They were taking so much time for me. I didn't care about sleep, right? I was gonna get my time in with the boys, play my video games, have my beers, and enjoy the time that I had that I wasn't working. But it's not that's not how you win. Skipping on sleep is really bad for you, and it's like you said, it causes cancer. Like, not sleeping enough causes cancer. It detoxifies your brain, and as we know, there's a bunch of toxins in there. So, yeah, try and prioritize sleep as much as possible. But we know it's really hard. We do.
It is. And this is what you are keying on right now about that getting your time back with the boys and everything because work takes it away. That is a very short-term mindset, and I've done it so many times myself because there are times where I'm so busy, I'm so burnt out, I'm spending so much time just working and being on and doing things for others that now I am in this position where I'm trying to I'm trying to relax, but I have no time. The responsible, healthy thing to do is to go to bed in 1 hour, but I'm just so desperate for some me time that I'll stay up for 3 or 4 hours.
Yep.
And then it creates a system where everything then gets worse. And you dig yourself a hole that you can't get out of.
Yeah, you can't really. I mean, sleep debt you can kind of make up for it, but you really can't. Unless
Not
let's
really.
be serious.
It's a nice thought that it can really be made up for, but once it's lost, it's really lost. Because here's what can end up happening. You have a situation like me. I did that for so long and everything. I have a circadian sleep disruption sorry, a sleep disorder. I have a circadian rhythm disruption disorder. Sleep disorder, insomnia, everything. Like it's the list is ridiculous. So I have to this day the issues where I wake up every 1 to 3 hours every single night. And if you also want another real example of how bad sleep deprivation is and being overworked, listen to how much trouble I'm having speaking right now. I'm in a state right now where I am burned out. I am working, even though it's not in 911 anymore, just to try to set myself up and do things better for the future and having a future mindset. I'm working over 60 hours a week, 7 days a week. And that's not including travel time, all the time I'm spending in the gym for myself, and food prep and eating my meals and trying to have enough time with my girlfriend and be able to see friends. And it's something that I'm paying for right now because the way that I have the time to try to do all those things is because I am sacrificing sleep.
But Alex, but why do you do those things? Why do you sacrifice so much for what?
Well, because I want to be happy. I want to be happy. And so when you do so much work and everything, you're trying to find a balance between happiness and what you need to do. I know that I need to take a step back, but it's hard.
Yep.
It's hard. And so one of the things that I'm actually going to be trying to focus on a little bit more to help me because I'm in a hole right now is to remind myself of things like this study right here talking about the short-term cost of lack of sleep. Because we talked about the long-term cost. Carcinogen is a really bad word, but it's a word that affects way into the future. And how many times have you heard someone say the phrase, oh, that's a later me problem?
Yep.
So it's so easy to dismiss things when you can say that. But look at these two options of the beds that you can have. Do you want a hospital bed or a nice comfy bed? And if you look at this, the strict results of here, and I picked this one because there are a ton of them. I picked this one because it specifically used military members. It looked at people in the military and their instances of injury versus no injury in comparison of sleep and no sleep. They used the hours of 4 hours or less a night and then 8 hours or more. And 2.3 times the amount of injuries occurred in the 4 hour sleep or less group. That in alone is huge. But here's the other thing to really recognize is that this was not just a study, it was a meta-analysis. And there is a hierarchy of scientific studies out there and how much you can actually glean from them in terms of whether it's usable to make a conclusion or not. An individual study is generally not a way for you to make an absolute conclusion on a subject. But you get a few different studies here and there and everything, and they all point in the same direction. Okay, you can make a pretty good conclusion about it. But when you get a meta-analysis, it is an overarching view using all of the studies that fit a certain criteria to statistically link them together into one super study. And what they are trying to do is to ensure that conclusions can actually be made, or at the very least, more statistically significant results can be obtained. So here's an example of this. If you have one study and it's looking at the frequency of heads or tails when you flip a coin, that's a pretty simple thing. We all know that's 50-50. But this first study only used 3 flips, and all 3 of them turn out to be tails. And the study concludes, well, every time you flip a coin, it's always going to be tails. Well, if you really believed one single study is going to show your full conclusion, then guess what? You have your conclusion there. The coin always is tails, no matter whenever you flip it. But we know that that's not the case. If we look at another study, this study said, okay, we flipped it 3 times, and there were 2 tails but 1 head. Okay, well, now we're getting closer to 50-50, but you still combine those two, it's way skewed towards tails. But then we look at another 10 studies that all did it. One of them found 3 heads, another one found 2 heads, 1 tail. And it all, when you pile them up together, comes out to a situation where maybe you've got 16 flips that all came out heads, and then 17 flips that all came out tails. Well, then that's a really close to 50-50. So you combine all those studies and you have a much more statistically correct conclusion. So when I'm telling you this meta-analysis found more than double the risk of injuries because of sleep deprivation, it is good enough to make that conclusion with a large degree of certainty.
Yeah. I'm glad that this first one wasn't speaking about military members, because then I was going to say it's a skewed study because there's no military members that get over 8 hours of sleep. But yeah, but yeah, that's, I mean, it makes sense that sleep hurts your body. I mean, sleep repairs your body. So if you don't sleep, your body doesn't repair. I mean, I think personally, I've been through experiences that I've pulled things after not getting good sleep. And yeah, before PT tests, you know if you didn't sleep well. Going to do lifts, you know if you didn't sleep well. I mean, it's a clear indication, and try not to get hurt.
Yeah, yeah. So here is another interesting thing from that study. They picked out one study that was also done about chronic lower back pain. And they showed that the soldiers that had sleep disorders were 50% more likely to have chronic lower back pain. And again, I picked this section out particularly because, again, we have a difference of short-term versus long-term bad effects. Acute injury might be small, and it might be just like, oh, I strained my tricep, and it takes like 2-3 weeks, and a little bit of care goes slowly back, and then in a month, cool, I'm back to normal. But chronic pain is something that happens slowly over time because it was not addressed or it wasn't recovered from initially. And so you end up just slowly digging that hole. So we have short-term injury, we have long-term chronic, long-lasting injury, and carcinogens. So you have the health-wise hit from both the physical as well as the, I guess it's still physical, but the more musculoskeletal as well as a systemic potential cause of long-term issue. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing to look at. It's from all angles bad.
Yeah.
And
it makes sense.
Back now to the short version, sleep also just increases bad decisions. We've kind of alluded to already, but let's explicitly say that. Lack of sleep increases your hunger and then bad decisions that could be associated with hunger or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, staying up until 3 a.m., we all know you get the munchies late at night. But then also, I think that sleep, so sleeping at the same time is so important as well. Like getting that schedule in, like getting 8 hours sporadically is one thing, but then consistently getting that sleep is really important for your body. And that's my hardest thing, is consistently going to bed at the same times. Because, you know, Friday night I want to hang out. Saturday night I want to go do a concert. But you know, you gotta try and fit it all in there. Like you said, it's a spectrum, and you gotta see where you fit in there and try and make it work the best for you.
Yep. All right. So, to summarize the sleep aspect, get it. Don't dismiss it for later. You cannot make it up, and it will harm you in some way, whether it's something you can detect or not. That is something that you can't decide, but you can always reduce the risk of something happening, because that's all you can control, is to make that slider of the degree of risk go towards the lower end instead of the higher end.
Nice.
So at first glance, to then have the next category be rest, don't you think that's the same as sleep? Well, it's not. There are such nuances when it comes to saying the difference between rest and sleep because there is crossover. Sleep is restful, but you can also rest when you're awake, and it's something that's necessary just for sanity. Reading a book, chilling in a hammock, listening to music, enjoying the sun, those are things that are going to rejuvenate you. So you want to make sure that, yes, you build in sleep, but you also build up ways to rest and recover during the day. And it's trying to figure out how to relax and how to give yourself the tools to not just replenish your body's ability to do things, but also your brain's. So your nutrition, drinking water, those are a factor in your ability to recover, and they give your body more of the tools to be able to recover well. But you have to also give yourself the stress relief in order to be able to use those tools. Because if you take yourself in a high stress situation always, then your body's always in some degree in fight or flight mode. And when that happens, your body sacrifices other body processes in order to give you that ability to respond to what it thinks is an immediate life threat. Because that short term living is going to be more important than trying to set yourself up to be in a good position 2 years from now. Because if you die in that short term, you don't get to hit 2 years from now. But staying in that state chronically leads to a lot of health issues.
Yeah, I think rest is crazy because when people injure things, they say rest it. Um, sit down and sit out. Rest isn't sitting out. Rest is actively getting better and building on what you have built. Right, of breaking down the things, building up the things that you broke down. Um, Rest, there's active rest, there's sleep rest, and then there's rest like, hey, take it easy on this ankle. Um, but like everything that we've said in the past three episodes, is that there's a spectrum for everything. Don't get too much rest. Don't sit on the couch too much. It's very easy and comfortable to sit on the couch, but it's also comfortable to run around with your grandkids at 70. It's not comfortable being in a wheelchair when you're 70. So you got to find what comfort fits for you.
Yes. So you keyed on something that is a really important aspect, and that is the active rest component. People are so accustomed to, again, what you said at the beginning, where, oh, you need to rest, well, then just stop. Stopping is not usually the best thing you can do. It is a better option than continuing down a bad path. But you want to make sure that if you are having the need to slow down, that you recognize it's the need to slow down and not the need to just stop completely. And one of the biggest issues that I have is the mentality of rice. And that sounds weird because it's something everyone has heard. Rice: rest, ice, compression, elevate. And there is some truth to that. However, it's been so grossly misunderstood that the biggest one about it is the I part, the icing part. The guy who coined rice and made it popular spent the rest of his career trying to basically debunk it and have people not give it so much importance. Because when it comes to resting, and if we take an injury and you have inflammation, it's localized inflammation that has the purpose of healing that injury.
Not all inflammation's bad.
Exactly. There's systemic inflammation versus acute inflammation. Systemic inflammation is where you're going to have more of the issues for health. But we're talking right now about acute inflammation, where it is you sprained your ankle and now your ankle is swollen. So that's a classic one. Oh, you sprained your ankle. Okay, rest, ice, compress it, and elevate it. That seems like 101. However, here's the thing about icing. Icing is good when there is too much local inflammation. If there is the right amount of local inflammation, don't ice it. You will slow down your healing. And if you rest it too much, well, then you can actually have issues like loss of mobility because you stopped moving it. So maybe we take the example of a sprained ankle and we initially don't ice it. It's a minor sprain, and you actually just slowly move your ankle around a little bit, not much, just enough so it's right before where it gets to be middle painful, and you keep it mobile and you just move it around constantly and you let it then rest. You can elevate it, sure, if you want to, but not the biggest deal in the world. And you maybe compress it if you are actually going to be actively on it in a way that you maybe may deem to be a bad decision. So you compress it to make sure that it stays at least secure so you don't hurt it more. And then you come back at the end of the day and you just move it around a little bit. And if it got a little too swollen because you were on it too much and then you ice it, okay. And then you take the ice off and you move it around again. And guess what? By the end of that recovery from doing that, instead of just, all right, I'm going to elevate it, do nothing, ice it 24/7, and compress everything out of it, and I'll do that for 3 weeks. Then you look at the 3 week progression between those two people. One of them is going to have mobility and functionality.
Yeah.
The other one will not.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny seeing these old things be debunked, even though we've all done them for so long. I think that your body knows what it's doing when it's inflaming certain things, right? When your brain's inflamed, there's an issue. When you twist your ankle, it's fighting something. It's doing something. Generally, I think that your body is on the right path, but keep an eye out for those things and stay up to date, because honestly, Rice might be right tomorrow because it was wrong today and it was right the day before and it was wrong the day before that. So stay up to date on it. That's for sure.
I think a great example of that also, where something's right and then wrong, are egg yolks. The
Oh
amount of
my
work on
God.
like eggs and whether they're good, bad, the worst things ever, something you should always have, has honestly been comedic gold.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
anyway. I tried eating only egg whites. I don't know. I can't. It's not for me. I don't think.
So I'll tell you what I've done for egg whites is mix them both. Where I'll do like a good spot for me is two full eggs. So two egg yolks are included in that, and then five additional egg whites.
That's a good way.
Yeah. So if you're now getting like the actually this is no there is some relevance to this with recovery and everything, but there are a lot
Oh
of
yeah.
and
And we're about to talk about supplements, and this is pretty much eggs are pretty much supplements.
with some of the stuff that's in them, yeah, they give you a lot of benefits, and a lot of the benefits come from the yolk. But the yolk also comes with a bunch of fat, and dietary cholesterol has very little to do with your systemic cholesterol, assuming you do not have a condition that makes me lying on that statement.
Mm-hmm.
But if you compare the fats and the protein amounts of 7 full eggs versus 2 full eggs and 5 egg whites, the ratio of fat to protein is going to be, if I had to put a random guess and myself on the spot, I would say you're looking at probably about 8 to 10 grams of fat with 2 egg yolks, and then 4 grams of protein per egg white. You're looking at 28 grams of protein and whatever 8 to 10 grams of fat versus 30 grams of fat and like 30 grams of protein or something along those lines. And one's going to be an overall better healthy choice than the other one.
I'm still eating the full egg with the egg yolk and the hard shell, and I get them pasture raised. So yeah, I think the happier my chickens are, the eggs are, the happier I'm gonna be. So the laughing cow cheese, I like that too because those cows laugh. So
Yep. Yeah. So you just got to find out what's going to be within your health requirements. Whatever's going to work for you is going to be just fine.
whatever makes you happy.
Exactly. So we'll use that transition to get into supplements. You'll notice the first thing that I say on this is that they are so overvalued. And the second thing I say on this is they're so overvalued. And the third thing I say on this is that I cannot understate how the value of these is just overvalued. Supplements are a small aspect of your overall health, and a lot of what is touted about them is pure and utter marketing.
Yeah.
They cannot substitute for a bad diet. They cannot substitute for a lack of training intensity. They cannot all of a sudden give you the recovery that you are not giving to yourself. And they will not go ahead and magically turn your sleep deprivation into a normal night of sleep. They cannot do those things. If I had to put a percentage on the contribution of supplements to your actual progress, it would be in the single digits of that equation. They're supplementary. It's in the name.
Yeah, I think the good things are banned for a reason. There's reasons that the things aren't allowed to be used. They work. As Dr. Alan Tissenbaum says, this is mostly smoke and mirrors. You know that there are good ones for you. There's things that do benefit, but I think those testosterone boosters and this and that. I get that there's a lot of different vitamins that can help with different things, the Tongkat Ali and everything. But I think generally, like we're saying, step zero is your diet. That's the number one supplementation you're doing every single day. You're eating different types of vitamins and minerals through that. So altering that first should be your first step before loading powders into your drinks.
Yeah. So I will say that I also proclaim that there are exceptions to just about everything. And supplements, I can key out a few that have been shown to have benefits when it comes to performance. I will also right now say that I'm not going to, in this presentation, touch on supplements that are for the purposes of, let's say, helping liver health, heart health, that kind of stuff. Because for those to have an effect for someone, it is very individual, extremely individual, whether they need some excess help or not, whether it is a situation where if they have a couple of those things, they can then avoid having a prescription. There are times where, say, I'll give some examples. There are some people who will maybe benefit from doing something like citrus bergamot to help their cholesterol levels stay stable when they have some trouble with fluctuations. For some people, that may help. There's milk thistle that can be good for your liver. Then there's, what are some other good ones? Oh, that's just coming to my mind right now. But here are some when it comes to physical performance that I can say in certain populations will have benefits. The first one is simply creatine monohydrate. And I know Joe loves creatine, and it's one of the few supplements that I actually will generally say as a blanket statement, if I do not know a reason for this person not to, that I will usually recommend creatine monohydrate to them. Not even necessarily for the physical performance benefits, but also because it has actually been tested and shown to negate some of the effects of sleep deprivation. And notice I'm saying some. It's not going to make up for all of it, but there was a study that I saw where what they did, they took people who had I don't know if it was, I can't remember the exact amount of hours in the sleep, but they tested people when they were with enough sleep. Then they tested them when they were sleep deprived, and then they tested them when they were sleep deprived but also had creatine monohydrate. And they gave them a mental acuity test. And they found that they performed the best when they were well rested. Shocker, I know. And they performed the worst when they were sleep deprived without creatine. But when given the creatine, they made up some of that gap. And it was actually statistically significant of a difference. So you could actually make with a good, reasonable conclusion with that, that there is a strong likelihood that creatine monohydrate helped them in their sleep deprived state. But I also want you to really, really key in on the way that I'm using my words in this whole thing. Not once did I say anything that was an absolute term. I did not say it will do this. I said it showed that it can do this and that it will make up some of the deficit. It's not absolute. It's not going to be true for everybody. And the only way for you to know to be beneficial for you is for you to try it and see if you align with what those results did.
And the good thing about creatine is if you drink too much, you pee it out. Creatine actually comes from naturally. Most of the creatine that's consumed is mechanized and it's non-natural. But most creatine that is natural comes from the juices in meats like beef. So when you're cooking or sous videing a steak and you cut it open, the myoglobin, the red stuff, that's where all the creatine's going. All the stuff that drips into the grill. But there's so many amazing studies about creatine, and there was so much controversy back in the day when I was coming up as a wrestler in the 2010s. People weren't allowed to use it. It was a banned substance because children were cutting weight and then taking creatine, and then the fluids that were supposed to be going to certain places were going to other places, and that makes sense. And for what creatine does, it wasn't the right scenario for that. But there's studies that show that creatine is great for children of all ages, and also it shows like there's a study that shows that if you take creatine with SSRIs, your SSRIs have a quicker onset and they're absorbed faster and better. So it increases the pathways of everything. So the water going into your brain is going to help your brain function better. It comes back to hydration, comes back to rest, comes back to sleep. The creatine's just a vessel for the same water that we're telling you to drink, and it's doing the same stuff. But it's if it, at the end of the day, it's all the same. You just got to figure out what works for you, and thankfully, creatine, if it's not for you, then you can just pee it out. Not much liver toxicity. New studies came out and shows pretty clean and pretty good for you.
Yep. And I like that you pointed out the fact that you're going to get a lot of the sources from red meat on that, because that's something that I actually will talk to my clients about, is that if they are in the population that is like, oh, I don't really eat red meat, doesn't really agree with me, I mostly go for the chicken and the fish. Well, I'm like, okay, well then you're actually a candidate to potentially get a lot of benefit from creatine, because you're not getting nearly as much when you're having the diet composed of what you are eating. So it goes into a good example of which populations are going to be more likely to have benefit for a supplement than others. The other one on this list that qualifies for that is the citrulline malate. Citrulline malate is something that's going to colloquially helps with the pump in the gym. But the way that it does that is by essentially doing the same thing as dietary nitrates. So if someone has a diet and it's really heavy in beets and spinach, to give an example for it, citrulline malate might not actually be as effective as someone who doesn't have those dietary nitrates. So you'll have more of a performance boosting effect for the populations that do not have those green leafy vegetables and beets and everything to give them the nitrates. They'll see more benefit than the ones who do have those in their diet. It's just all about figuring out where you fit in the realm of this world of infinite possibilities with trying to figure out all the stuff. And it really goes to show that none of this is a clear example of, well, if you don't have X, then just add Y and you'll get to Z, because the amount of variables in each of those situations isn't just whether you have red meat or creatine. There are so many other factors. It could be things you don't have any control over. You do not have control over the genes that compose your body that dictate how you process and use every single one of these compounds. That's just not something that you can know and predict. You can just test and see what you then can have happen on a real life scale.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter how many vitamins you take or how much the effective dose is. If you take every single vitamin in the world, you're not going to be the healthiest person. You know, you need to figure out what's going on in your life and figure out how it's going to work for you.
Yeah. And we can take a personality view on that too. Because someone who is taking, say, 30 different supplements every single morning, to me, that sounds like someone who is trying to out supplement an inferior diet, not training the way they should, and seeing if they can get away with working less, because maybe they have that mindset of, listen, I'm an entrepreneur and I have my routine where I go to bed at midnight and I wake up at 5 and I ice bath for 30 minutes and do all this stuff to get my brain right, and I stare at myself in the mirror and do all these things, and then once 7 o'clock comes around and I've fasted for 2 hours, then I'll have my drink of choice that then primes me for, like, there's a grain of truth in every one of those statements that may have benefit. But when you say that all of those things in your supplements are the reason that you are doing so well and so much, to me, that just sounds like wasted energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just I mean, you gotta sleep. It's called supplements to supplement things that are already good. If you supplement bad things, and then don't even get me started with things that we don't know what it is and we're taking it. You know what I mean? These T boosters and these pre workouts that people don't read, or they do read and they still don't know and they still take it. So no Jack 3D. That is not 98 octane approved. Okay, none of that. All right.
So, Joe, you're going to love what I'm about to tell you. There was a study, and it looked at whether pre workout did anything or not. And I've seen a couple of these, and some say that there are benefits, but this one did something beautiful. It didn't just test water versus a pre workout drink, it tested water versus a pre workout drink and water with pink food coloring in it to test whether people got the benefit of a pre workout. And unsurprisingly, there was the least amount of benefit from the water. But there was equal benefit from the pink drink and the pre workout.
Yep.
The, Here's what I will finish off the supplement thing with. Just because we can say we don't know what this is, we don't know what it will do, but if someone tells you it's going to do X and you believe it will, then guess what? The placebo effect is a real thing.
Yep.
Because you believe something, that can go ahead and just make it true. And it makes it really, really, really difficult to discern whether or not what you are taking is worth taking. Because even though it may do absolutely nothing for you, the power of the brain can be monumental. And if you decide that taking that pre workout gives you an extra 30 pounds on your squat and you believe it to your very core, well, then when you compare not having that and having it, there's going to be a 30-pound difference.
When we were in Slovakia, we had all the boys out there working out. I'll post some videos one of these days. But I had gorilla mode, the nitric one, the no caffeine, and I was giving everyone scoops, and they were all amped up and goofed up and ready to rock and roll, lifting heavy. No one knew that there was no caffeine. You know, no one had any idea. But that just shows you that manifestation is real, man.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking things are gonna happen makes them happen. So believing in yourself. How about we start with believing in ourselves, and then we can talk about supplements later.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. That's a perfect story of this. Perfect. It is a real life example of what someone can see in an academic study, and when you can do that on your own to give yourself an extra layer of scientific validity, that's phenomenal. That is science. Joe just did an amazing show of a scientific experiment, and he was just having fun with the boys. That's the best thing you can possibly do.
Hell yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get into the dark. Military, first responders. We have all been through some shit. All of us have. And we have to deal with that. So I cannot have a presentation that is designed for military first responders talking about rest, recovery, and not acknowledge the fact that we are talking about taking care of yourself and your health. And we have all experienced trauma in one way or another. And even if you are with people who have experienced the exact same thing, the way everyone responds to these is going to be individual. And whether that is a good response, a healthy response, or the extreme other end, a lot of it has to do with what your internal beliefs are in the proper way to handle it. So, this is where the crawl, walk, run comes in for this week. It's not going to be about the sleeping. It's not going to be about recovery. It's not going to be about rest. The real, true, health impacting crawl, walk, run for this week is about whether or not you have actually faced what you have been through or are going through or know you will go through. So it is something that affects absolutely everybody, not just you. It affects everybody who's experienced whatever it is that caused that trauma, but it also affects everyone who interacts with you when you let that trauma do horrible things to you. And it may be as simple as it makes it hard to sleep at night, or it could be as compounding as the start of generational trauma that gets passed down through your children, and then they experienced it from you, so it goes into their children. And when you think about your trauma potentially having an impact not just on you but the people whom you may view as being your legacy, there is an unfortunate reality that you could be passing down some really deep and dark stuff if you don't truly acknowledge and then handle it.
Yeah, a study just came out showing that your DNA is altered by trauma, and DNA throughout time through your ancestral trauma, it's a real thing, which is so wild that it's like it's up to us, but is it really up to us? There's so many different things that are at play. It's like wow, we're this is where the manifestation and thought framing really comes into play because there's so much against us. There really is, including ourselves. And that's where I think that we need to start is with ourselves and understanding in order to have a healthy life and a healthy brain, we need to put healthy things around it, whether that's healthy friends, healthy foods, healthy situations. Because if you're doing bad things around bad people, then bad things are going to happen to you, 100%. But then also taking that time to sit back and think about what's going on and how it's affected you is definitely important.
Yeah. So let's say you you state that, well, I've never had like an event that I have nightmares about. I never had this call where it haunts me. I didn't have this mistake that when I did that, it cost something awful because of what I did. And that is my trauma. And that is your moment where you're like, I have PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder, from this specific trauma. Even if you don't have that, some people don't even know that there's a thing called CPTSD, complex PTSD. And that is something that is harder to pinpoint because it's a slow grow of lots of small things that add up over time.
Yeah.
So here is a relatable manifestation of that to some degree. If you are a military and first responder, there are some things that I have noticed as trends. One is you don't like sitting with your back to doors in public places. You go to a restaurant and your instinct is to go into the seat where you can see that front door. You may be able to see the front door and the exit and the fire exit. You may be able to have a, you may have like the desire to sit on the edge of a room so you can see as many of the people in it as possible. You may end up in a situation where you're out in public and you're talking to your friend, your spouse, someone. You don't look at them the whole time. You look at them and you talk to them and you're scanning everything as you go. Here's another one. If you drive and you park your car, you are more likely to back into a space than you are to drive forward into a space because you're making sure you are ready to leave as quickly as possible if necessary. These are all things that, even if you don't necessarily do, you hear that and you go, that makes sense. But I know I've had conversations with family members when, like when I was in a really bad state and I was just going out to a, just like a little burger place. But since we live so far apart, it was halfway. It was a place I'd never been to before. And my head wasn't great. And it was to the point where when we got there and everything, I was with my brother and his wife. And his wife sat down in the only spot that had a view of the front door from that table. And I was like, I need to be comfortable. I have to be good. And I can't have that feeling of that door behind me. And I actually had to ask her, like, do you mind if I sit there? And she was so confused. And she was like, what? I was like, yeah, like, do you mind if I just sit there? Like, I'll just be a little more comfortable there. She's like, what? Why? I was like, oh, I just don't want my back to the door right now. and she didn't get it. And my brother had to be like, listen, just do it. I'll like explain it later, because he at least has an idea of that kind of thing too. And so she did, but I'll never forget that feeling of just different experiences causing such different needs in that moment in time. And it took me a while to realize it, but looking back, I'm like, that was just straight up awareness of everything that can possibly go wrong, and me being in a place that I did not know and needing to have some feeling of control over the situation, because in reality, I didn't really have any. And because of my mindset, it was a necessity. And I didn't make all those connections at that point. At that point, I was just like, I'm just not having a good day. I just need that to feel comfortable. Looking back now, I'm going, yikes. I'm glad I've gotten better.
Yeah, I mean, like you were saying, there's different like types of PTSD, and there's like conditionings, like Pavlov's dog. Like when, I mean, for I know the guys in the military with me, like when your phone alarm doesn't go off in the morning, that's a really big problem. Waking up without your phone alarm, that means that you're late to work. That means that the world is over. Um, and yeah, the sirens are obvious. Things come in, but I've woken up in a panic so many times, just by myself, just be like, oh, all right, okay, all right, I'm good. I'm out. Yeah, all right, I'm good. So it's like, that's not bothering me, but that's just a little thing that the army has forced into me. It's awesome.
Yep.
But then they've also made me a great person. I've learned a lot of discipline, a lot of really good things, and I've met a lot of really great people. And
Oh yeah.
I like for those experiences to be talked about as well.
Yeah. No, the positives are great, but the problem is that there are too many people that have the mentality of ignore the bad
Mm-hmm.
and just go for the positive, and it's a harmful way of thinking. So, like when you look at these slides that have the crawl, walk, run, all we're talking about right now is the acknowledgement of it, that first crawl, and how I had to try. I couldn't, in that moment where I was in that restaurant, that truly acknowledge what was happening. I had half of the puzzle, but I didn't connect it until later on. That's where the next bit comes in. Of the walking is just seeking help. If you can have the strength to realize that getting help is not just a good idea, but a needed idea, that's going to be so big. And that help is going to be completely individual to you. It doesn't necessarily have to be seeing a doctor. There are other ways to get help, even if it's as simple as just having your Thursday night dinner with your group of people that have been through similar things, and you guys can then go ahead and have all the dark humor in the world about it to start making it easier to talk about it, because that is a method of talking about it, is to have some of the darkest humor ever, and we have all been there, in terms of the jokes that should not be said, and things that someone who has not been a military or first responder personnel, where they're going to look at you and think you are insane. That stuff is cathartic. It's a way to get help, and then all you have to do to run is recognize that that's never quite going to go away completely. There's always going to be ways to flash back, and there are always going to be costs, because you have seen some of the true darker sides of humanity. And so keeping up with yourself and knowing that, sure, sometimes you can back off on the help, but other times got to go head first right into that help.
And I think another part of this is also helping others, recognizing it in your friends and talking to your friends. And one thing that we always talk about at 98 Octane is keeping that connection close, right? Keeping your boys with you. So that's one thing that we're trying to do with the app, is get people together, talking to each other each day, and staying on top of each other's stuff. So
Mhm.
keeping the boys around you, getting yelling at each other, calling each other names, it's what keeps you together, keeps you going. Um,
Yeah.
so think about yourself, think about your boys, think about your buddies.
Yeah, it's big. It is big. So handle it. We're not therapists. We only understand because we've been in our own versions of whatever it is that you've experienced. And this is not the time to say, well, yours is not as bad as mine. Nothing of that sort matters. It's different. And the biggest thing to recognize is that it's all relative to you and your experience. The The easiest thing that I'll throw around to so many people is the phrase heavy is relative. Just because I can deadlift 500 and you look at that and you're like, oh my God, that's so much. Or you're someone who deadlifts 800 and you're like, puny. It's all relative. For me, lifting over 500 is a struggle and it's really heavy. For that 800-pound deadlifter, that's a warm up. For someone who deadlifts 300, that seems like an insurmountable goal that I'll work for that, but it's going to take years and years and years if I can ever get there. It's all relative. And so you need to find out how to handle your trauma. But you also can't use that trauma as a crutch and demean other people's. Even if you're that 800-pound deadlifter in this analogy, don't demean my 500. And my 500, I'm not going to demean somebody else's 300. It's all relative. And what you should then decide to do is you take that 200 pounder, 300 pounder, 500 pounder, 700 pounder, 800 pounder, 900 pounder, and you get all of these guys together. And you know what? You've all been lifting. You're all on the same team. You can all help each other. That 200 pounder may have, hey, 900 pounder, this idea I have, or this thing that I did, it really helped me. And maybe that ends up being the moment that 900 pounder goes, oh shit, that could work. So just recognize we can all understand, even if it's not your identical experience.
I think it's all, yeah, yeah. I think that's perfect. That's a great analogy. And I also think it's about surrounding yourself around people who you want to be around and you want to be like. Um, it's all like if you're around a bunch of depressed people, then it's going to be depressing. Uh, and you want to surround yourself around people who are out and doing things and get out in the sunlight and get sweaty and get dirty and get connected with the earth and eat things that are from the earth and have fun. Um, and having fun is so important to all of us, to life. Um, and it can't be overlooked. When we talk about all these different things, fun is a part of all of them. Fun through eating, fun through talking to your friends, fun through working out, fun through making goals and accomplishing them. It's all supposed to be fun. So let's try and make it fun with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. But there's importance in the not fun. And a way to help all this stuff is recognize that when you have the unfun portion of trying to face it and deal with it, all that's going to do is increase your capacity for fun later on. And it's a really, really hard concept that I'll work with another lifting analogy for. There are people that I'll work with, and they may already deadlift 400 pounds, but they do it really inefficiently. So then I'll say, listen, you have raw strength, but you don't know how to use it and position yourself. So you may continue from this point on doing exactly what you're doing. And in 6 months, you may even PR at 450. However, let me change a few things about your deadlift. Let me tweak what you are doing. It will make you weaker in the short term. But if you stick with those core fundamentals that I'm going to introduce to you now, that 6-month PR that you're going to have, it's not going to be 450. It's going to be more than that. So even though it's not fun to initially handle your trauma, it will increase the amount of fun you can have later on from a 450-pound deadlift to the fun of a 500-pound deadlift. And I think that we can all agree in the terms of trying to lift as much weight as you can or be as happy as you can have a higher number of happiness and poundage for that lift, and you did it safely and responsibly. I cannot think of a reason why you should not do that.
Yep, doing it without getting hurt. Handling things without getting hurt. Yes, Alex. Exactly.
It's true physically and mentally.
Yep.
I will also freely admit, as I kind of look away, that it's a lot easier on the physical side of things than the mental.
Yep.
Yeah, the physical is tangible. You can look at a lift and say it is X amount of pounds, and when that amount is increased, it is better. And to a point, that's true. Mentally, it's really hard to see progress, especially when you are looking at things that can be as deep-seated as something that you've tried to ignore for the last 10 years.
Awesome.
So, if you are in a situation where you know that there's a strong likelihood of having something happen, prevention. And I'm going to talk about this in the physical sense. It's a lot harder in the mental sense, but you can make analogies similar to the way that I've been doing so far in this presentation, where we're talking about happiness as a form of pounds, taking care of yourself and doing it healthily at the start, even though it's a little more unpleasant, to then bring it in later on. And there was a concept that I want to introduce yourself for the physical health side of things, and that is prehab. There is a mentality that I have about injuries where they are not simply a delay to your weight goal or whatever. They're actually going to essentially subtract a little bit from what you otherwise would have been able to have at your peak than if you had not gotten injured. So it's not just a delay, it's also a lowering of that max lift that you could have otherwise have. So having a system of prehab is a really good idea. If you want a really catchy way of putting it, prehab is greater than rehab. Rehab something that's already happened. You had a surgery, you had an injury, now you have to build yourself back up to being functional again. When instead you can just do prehab and hopefully never have that issue arise. Or if it does arise, you've done some of the homework beforehand to speed up the recovery compared to what it otherwise would have been. Sleep, nutrition, rest, recovery, they are all part of the prevention pathway. But as far as prehab goes, you get to more acute things. So you're looking at things like deep tissue work, doing the boring internal, external rotations for your shoulders, or trying to make sure your hips are functioning and able to turn in all sorts of different directions while keeping your pelvis facing forward. Making sure you still have mobility, but also stability with that mobility. If you can dislocate your shoulder and put it all the way back, well, guess what? That's technically mobility, but it's a high risk one. I would much rather be able to just go whoop, but have it be stable than be able to go wee and have it be unstable. If I can work for the wee to be stable, that would be awesome. But it takes a lot of intent. And the last thing you want to do is, if you can avoid surgery, that's phenomenal, but you still have to be honest about if the surgery is actually going to be something that's necessary and beneficial for you in the long run. In which case, you can make an argument that it might be something you want to do sooner than later. But there are so many examples of both that I cannot say more than that in this presentation, because every single one of those situations has an insane amount of variables. So I can only put in the question mark for surgery, and you have determined whether or not it's something you try to avoid at all cost, something that you do a little bit of prehab for and then have the surgery on purpose and then do the rehab, or if it's something that you have to get done instantly and then handle whatever happens afterwards. Those are all individual.
Yeah, I think that prevention is everything that we're talking about, and it's sleep, nutrition, rest, and recovery. A healthy person gets sick, they bounce back. A sick person gets sicker, they don't bounce back. That's just how it works. I mean, if you're fit and you twist your ankle, the chances of you getting back on that treadmill in a little bit is much higher. So try and keep yourself at a higher running temperature, and hopefully you can bounce back a little quicker.
Yep. So, the 911 side of things, one of the things that I don't want to say made me, I'm going to say, okay, so one of the things that really frustrated me about taking medical calls for 911 is how much of it was preventable. The amount of people who would call who were, I would say, 65 and over with a issue along the lines of like a respiratory attack or something of those lines where they need to have a paramedic come. The amount of them that said they also had diabetes, high blood pressure, AFib, or congestive heart failure, or kidney disease, or like things like that. And I kept noticing that the most common ones were things that I would look at and go, you could have just not had that if you just moved around a bit. And it really got to me. And it's one of the things that has stuck with me ever since then, leaving 911 and going into the world of trying to improve people's health and physicality, because a motivating factor for me is to have them not be one of those people making those calls. And it's so visceral for me because I've seen it happening, and now I'm on the side of trying to prevent it from happening.
Yep. What about prevention? We're all about prevention. This is all about prevention.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Great, great, Alex. Awesome.
All right. So that takes us to the end. Today was heavy, but important. So I tried to put the trauma stuff in the middle so you can have a nice little bell curve for having it start off easy to understand and then get that big peak, but then finish off with just some nice little cool down work of just talking about, okay, just general health prevention. So hopefully it was a way you guys could actually have it be palatable and understandable. And again, that's what I try to do with everything that I do, is to not just spout scary things at you, but to make sure what I'm saying can be understood on a deeper level more instantaneously than just me trying to scaremonger people into believing what I believe. Make your own conclusions.
Yeah, I think the thing that we're trying to do is push forth education on what's happening around you, and then simple actionable steps on what we could do to change this. And that brings us to our final part next week, Thursday, putting it all together. We're going to upload this back to our YouTube channel. Maybe you'll see some clips elsewhere. But I think that's all that 98 Octane wrote from me, Alex. Anything else?
I just want to say thank you, especially if you sat through that whole thing. And that means when you heard us talking about trauma and dealing with that, there were things that you thought of. There were moments you remembered, and there were feelings that you felt again. And I'm hoping it was helpful for you, even if it doesn't feel like it was helpful in this immediate short term. In fact, it might feel quite bad as immediate short term, but I'm hoping it's something you can think through and use it as a motivation to have that initial dip to increase your happiness cap later on. So thank you for sticking with us. I appreciate you guys doing everything that you do.
We're trying to spark you to conquer. Let's do it. All right. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Until next time.